The air at the old station was thin and cold. It smelled of damp earth and rusting iron. A single weak bulb cast a lonely yellow circle on the concrete platform. This was where journeys began and ended. For me, it was both. I clutched my ticket, the paper flimsy against my numb fingers. It felt like a verdict, not a destination. The night was quiet, but my mind was loud with the ghosts of words I had shouted years ago. Words that had built a wall between me and the only home I had ever known, a place I swore I would never see again. Now, here I was, pulled back by a silence I could no longer ignore. I looked down the tracks. They disappeared into a deep, unforgiving darkness. It was the same darkness I had carried inside me for a decade. I had left this place full of anger and youthful pride. I had wanted to prove something, to prove that I didn't need them, that my way was the right way. But what had I proven? I had built a life, yes, a life of tall buildings and hurried conversations, a life that felt a million miles away from this quiet, sleeping town. But in all that time I had never truly escaped the echo of a slamming door and a father's disappointed gaze. The wind picked up, rustling the dead leaves that had gathered in the corners of the platform. It sounded like whispers, regrets, what-ifs. I pulled my collar tighter, a useless gesture against a chill that came from within. The station clock was frozen at 9:30, its hands locked in a time that no longer existed. It felt fitting. I was returning to a past that was similarly stuck, a moment of conflict that had defined everything that followed. I wondered if he ever looked at the clock and thought of me. I wondered if he knew I was finally coming home, too late. A distant whistle cut through the silence. The train was coming. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady rhythm of the approaching engine. This was it, the final step back. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times, but none of my preparations felt adequate now. The reality was colder, heavier. This wasn't a return to what was. It was a journey toward what was lost. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and braced myself for the ghosts I knew were waiting for me on the other side of this ride. The argument had been loud and ugly. It was one of those fights that starts small, a spark of disagreement, and quickly grows into a raging fire that consumes everything in its path. We stood in the living room, the one with the floral wallpaper and the faded family photos on the mantelpiece. I had announced my plans to leave, to chase a dream he called foolish. He saw it as a betrayal of the life he had planned for me, a life of simple, steady work in our small town. I saw it as my only escape. The words we exchanged were sharp and cruel, each one a stone thrown with perfect, painful aim. I remember the silence that followed the storm. It was more painful than the shouting. My father stood by the window, his back to me, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. My mother was in the kitchen, her quiet sobs the only sound in the house. I packed my bag with a defiant energy, fueled by a self-righteous anger. I was so sure I was right. I was so certain that leaving was the only answer. I walked out without looking back, convincing myself that the sting in my eyes was from the wind, not from the tears I refused to shed. That departure became the defining moment of my life. For 10 years that moment was a wall I had built brick by brick with silence and distance. There were holidays missed, birthdays acknowledged with sterile, impersonal cards, phone calls that were brief and stilted, circling around the edges of the things that truly mattered but never daring to touch them. I told myself it was for the best. I told myself that the chasm between us was too wide to cross. But in the quiet hours of the night, in the lonely landscape of my city apartment, I would trace the lines of that memory and feel the weight of what I had done. Now that weight was crushing me. The pride that had once felt like armor now felt like a lead coat. I had won the argument in a way. I had the career, the independence, the life I had fought for. But what had I lost in the process? I had lost the easy laughter of a family dinner. I had lost the comfort of knowing there was a place where I belonged unconditionally. I had traded the warmth of a home for the cold, hard currency of ambition, and I was only now beginning to understand the true cost of that transaction. My life in the city was a carefully constructed image. It was a world of glass and steel, of deadlines and promotions. I lived in an apartment with a view that stretched for miles, but I rarely took the time to look at it. My days were a blur of meetings, emails, and networking events. I was successful, by all the metrics the world uses to measure such things. I had a good job, a nice car, and a circle of acquaintances who knew me as the person I had become, not the person I had been. It was a life I had designed, a life I thought I wanted more than anything. But there was another life, one that existed in the faded photographs of my memory, a life of dirt roads and sprawling oak trees. A life where the biggest event of the week was the Friday night football game. A life where my father taught me how to fix a bicycle chain and my mother taught me how to find the North Star. I had pushed that life away, dismissed it as small and confining. I had seen it as a cage and I had fought desperately to fly free. I had been so focused on escaping that I never stopped to appreciate the safety and love that cage had provided. The two worlds could not have been more different. In the city, I was defined by my achievements. At home, I was defined by my name, by my family. In the city, time was a commodity, something to be managed and maximized. At home, time was a river, flowing at its own unhurried pace. I had chosen the fast-paced world of the city, believing it was superior. I had convinced myself that the life I had left behind was insignificant, a relic of a past I had outgrown. But the truth was, I carried it with me every day. It was there in the moments of profound loneliness, when the noise of the city faded and all I could hear was the silence of my own apartment. It was there when I saw a father and son laughing together in a park, a sight that would send a sharp, unexpected pang through my chest. I had built a new life, but it was a house built on a foundation of unresolved past. I had run so far and so fast, but I had never managed to outrun the ghost of the boy who had left his home with a broken heart and a stubborn will. The train rattled on through the night. Each clack of the wheels on the track was a tick of the clock, counting down the miles and counting up the years. I watched the dark countryside fly by the window, a blur of sleeping towns and lonely farmhouses. With each passing mile, the city I had called home for a decade felt more and more distant, like a dream I was waking up from. The train was a time machine, not just carrying me through space, but also pulling me back through my own history. A history I had tried so hard to forget. I thought about the phone call. It had come on a Tuesday morning. My mother's voice was small, fragile. "He's gone," she had said. Just 2 words. But they were enough to shatter the world I had so carefully constructed. The wall of pride and anger I had maintained for 10 years crumbled in an instant. There were no more arguments to be won, no more points to be proven. There was only a vast empty space where my father used to be, a space that could never be filled. The journey felt endless. I was trapped in this metal tube, hurtling through the darkness with nothing but my thoughts for company. And my thoughts were relentless. I replayed our last conversation over and over again, the harsh words, the stubborn silence. If only I had called, if only I had visited, if only I had said I was sorry. The if-onlys were a cruel chorus, mocking me with all the chances I had let slip through my fingers. Time, I realized, was the one thing you could never get back. You can earn more money, but you cannot earn more time. As the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of gray and pink, I saw familiar landmarks, the old water tower, the bridge over the creek. The landscape of my childhood was coming into view, and with it, a profound sense of dread and sorrow. The train was slowing, its journey almost over. My journey, however, was just beginning. I was about to step back into a world I had abandoned, a world that was now irrevocably changed. The clatter of the wheels was the sound of my past catching up to me. My mother was waiting for me on the platform. She looked smaller than I remembered, and the lines on her face seemed deeper. For a moment we just stood there, separated by 10 years of silence, and a lifetime of things left unsaid. The air between us was thick with a mixture of grief, relief, and a deep, unspoken pain. I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry felt too small. I'm here felt too late. so I said nothing. I just looked at the woman who had given me life, the woman whose heart I had broken when I left. She took a step forward and wrapped her arms around me. It was not a hug of anger or accusation. It was a hug of pure, unadulterated love. The kind of love that weathers all storms. The kind of love that waits patiently for a child to find their way home. I buried my face in her shoulder, and for the first time in a decade, I let myself cry. I cried for the lost years. I cried for my father. I cried for the foolish boy I had been, and she just held me, her hand stroking my back, offering a comfort that no words could ever provide. We drove home in silence. It was a comfortable silence, not the strained, angry one I remembered. I looked out the window at the familiar streets of my hometown. Everything was the same, yet everything was different. The old movie theater was now a community center. The corner store had a new sign. The town had moved on just as I had. But the feeling of home, the deep, instinctual knowledge of every turn in the road, was still there. It was a part of me, whether I had wanted to admit it or not. When we arrived at the house, I hesitated before getting out of the car. The porch swing was still there. The rose bushes my father had so carefully tended were in bloom. It was all so painfully normal. My mother didn't rush me. She simply waited, understanding the war that was raging inside me. This house was no longer just a house. It was a monument to a life I had chosen to leave behind, and to a man whose love I had only just begun to understand. Taking a deep breath, I opened the car door and stepped out to face it. The funeral was a blur of hushed voices and somber faces. People I had known my whole life came up to me, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and curiosity. They offered condolences, shared memories of my father. They spoke of him as a good man, a pillar of the community, a friend. I listened and nodded, my own grief a heavy cloak that muffled the world around me. Each kind word was a fresh reminder of the man I had kept at a distance, the man I had never truly allowed myself to know as an adult. I stood at the back of the church, an observer in my own family's sorrow. I watched my mother, her strength a quiet miracle in the face of such profound loss. I saw the way our neighbors and friends rallied around her, a testament to the community I had once dismissed as small and suffocating. I had sought freedom in the anonymity of the city, but here, in this small church, I saw the beauty of being known, of being part of something larger than oneself. It was a connection I had severed, and the loss of it felt acute. After the service, when the church had emptied and the sun was beginning to set, I walked to the front and stood before the closed casket. This was the conversation I had been dreading, the one I had been rehearsing on the long train ride home. But now that I was here, the words wouldn't come. What could I say that would bridge the gap of 10 years? What apology could possibly be enough? All the anger, all the pride, all the justifications I had clung to for so long, they all melted away, leaving only a raw, aching regret. So I didn't speak. I just stood there in the silence of the empty church and let the memories wash over me. I remembered him teaching me to ride a bike, his hand steady on the back of the seat. I remembered him cheering for me at my baseball games, his voice the loudest in the crowd. I remembered the look of pride in his eyes on my graduation day, and I remembered the look of pain in his eyes the day I left. In the end, my farewell was a silent one, a quiet, personal goodbye to the father I loved and the man I wished I had known better. A few days later I was back at the station, the same station of ghosts, but this time the sun was shining. My mother stood with me, our hands clasped together. This goodbye was different from the one a decade ago. There was no anger, no bitterness. There was only a shared sadness and a new, fragile understanding. We didn't make grand promises to call every week or visit every month. We didn't need to. The wall between us had come down and we both knew that things would be different now. The silence between us was no longer a weapon, but a space for healing. The train arrived, its horn a mournful sound in the quiet morning air. It was time to go, time to return to the life I had built for myself, a life that now felt strangely foreign. I hugged my mother one last time, a long, tight embrace that said everything we couldn't put into words. "He was proud of you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He kept every article you were ever mentioned in. He just didn't know how to tell you. Those words were a gift, a small piece of redemption in the midst of my regret. As the train pulled away from the station, I watched my mother grow smaller and smaller until she was just a speck on the platform. I watched my hometown recede into the distance, its familiar landscape a painful, beautiful memory. The house was still there, the porch swing was still there, but it would never be the same. A part of it was gone forever. A part of me was gone forever. The home I had run from was now a place I longed for, but it was a place I could never fully return to, because the version of it I wanted back only existed in my memory. The train picked up speed, the clatter of the wheels a familiar rhythm. I was heading back to my life, but I was not the same person who had made the journey here just a few days ago. I was carrying a new weight, the weight of irretrievable time, but I was also carrying a new understanding, an understanding of love, of loss, and of the quiet, enduring strength of family. The last train home had brought me to a place of profound sorrow, but it had also, in its own way, brought me back to myself. The journey was over, but the lesson had just begun.